Founded in 1889, the Westport Museum for History and Culture is dedicated to embracing the truths of history so that all can see themselves in our American story. Through exhibitions, programs, and unique experiences like our escape room, the museum uses a variety of ways to explore the breadth of our national history. With extensive object, art, and textile collections that bring history to life, the museum also houses a significant archive of documents that date back to the 17th century. In 2023, Westport Museum for History and Culture received a Forrest E. Mars Jr. Chocolate History Grant and created the exhibit Bittersweet: Chocolate in the American Colonies. It was a key part of the museum's methods to use unusual approaches to examine difficult histories.
The grant proposal that we submitted to American Heritage Chocolate was for support to do an exhibit about chocolate in the American colonies, very specifically in our town in Westport, Connecticut. Westport was colonized in 1648, but is an area that has continuous habitation for 7,500 years. So in many ways, Westport is a way that we could talk about the entire American story using objects in our collection. And what we know from our collection is that we have quite a bit of archival material that relate to the sale and the consumption of chocolate in the 18th century. And so the proposal was really about how could we use this material to install an exhibit that talks not only about the local story, but using it to talk about this larger story about chocolate history and what it means to the larger socioeconomic realm of the period. This exhibit had a lot of material from our archives, notably virtuous ledgers that talked about the sale of chocolate that was processed into essentially cakes or bars, as well as the sale of cocoa beans for use at home. You know, in producing this project and going through our archives, some of the things that stood out to us in terms of new information, new stories, was that by the 1790s, regular people who were not considered wealthy, were purchasing chocolate, right? They were setting aside some of their wages to engage in this relatively expensive commodity, this luxury product. So that was something new for us to kind of just see how someone who was a quote-unquote common laborer, you know, not a person of wealth, felt it was important to buy chocolate from a local merchant. Another important aspect of this exhibit was working with other institutions in our area, including the Pequot Library, which has a significant and important historic archive, to borrow books from the 16th century, as well as images of other 17th century recipe books, receipt books for the catalog, to demonstrate the material culture around cacao and how ubiquitous it had started to become by the late 1600s. So that was a big part of it, really reaching out into our larger community to see where there was material that we could use to build a really full exhibit for the viewer.
The Wilton Historical Society lent 2 objects for this exhibition. They're actually a pair of objects, which are chocolate molds from the early 20th century that depict George and Martha Washington, the first president and first lady of the United States of America. They're objects from our collection at Wilton, and they were sort of perfect additions to the exhibit, as they are very unique chocolate molds that fit within the scope of sort of this idea of colonial chocolate.
So this exhibit was really interesting because the Westport Museum for History and Culture is located in a 19th century home that was adapted out of an 18th century home. And I tell you this because it means that our rooms are of various disparate sizes, and the gallery where the chocolate exhibit was going to be is, in fact, is a very small room. So we had to maximize the space as much as possible.
The goal of the build was to be sure it was accessible to all ages while being exciting to all. This was a different build than what I normally do. I usually do things centered around creating realistic reproductions of real places. We were also working with a small room, so the design and the build had to be feel substantial while not taking up a lot of real estate. We chose to do a combination of realistic spaces as well as those that also incorporate a cartoon-like format with the graphics, as well as installing part of the exhibit at both child height and adult height. I feel like this was one of the best exhibits we've done because it really stretched our creativity by using the physical space to make a difficult history really accessible.
All the cocoa beans in the exhibit were fun to sort of move around and manipulate to get information. It felt like almost you were like playing a game to access the information. It felt like you earned it a little bit more. And I like the exhibit itself, just the decoration, the theming of it, gave it more context, gave it a little bit more energy than just text on the wall.
So some of the things that we have in this exhibit is actually an almost life-size cacao tree that is 2 and 3-dimensional. So it is a drawing, if you will, of a cacao tree. This is really deliberate to appeal to children, as well as models of cacao pods so that they could be felt and touched, so that people who might never actually experience cacao in real life can see an approximation, feel an approximation of what it's like. Another aspect of the exhibit is an interactive that follows the process of cacao in the 18th and 19th centuries from bean, from tree, all the way to the sacks that were shipped to North America and elsewhere for use as drinking chocolate. And that required the skill of our operations director to build this interactive that resembles a cocoa shed, as well as our programs director, Nicole Carpenter, to actually create the interactive in a way that was appealing to young people. This exhibit was incredibly important for the museum because it is a natural evolution around work that we have done around historic foodways as a way to talk about difficult histories and difficult topics so that the public is not only willing to engage, but can understand. So this kind of really interesting aspect of history, George Washington was here, there were taverns, this kind of feels very exciting and fun to people. This is a way that we can really get to the deeper discussion of how did the tavern survive? How did it get its goods? How did it get that drinking chocolate? Who created it? Who processed it? So foodways is a really good way to talk about things that might not otherwise be easy to talk about. Bittersweet was an exhibit that really got a lot of public attention, a lot of engagement from our public, from visitors, which numbered over 1,000, and included very unique tour groups like Hangtime Real Talk, which is a group out of New Haven, Connecticut that helps formerly incarcerated people and their families re-enter the social realm of society. Interns, Mellon interns from Mystic Seaport came down to visit us and see how we do an exhibit like this, which talks about difficult history and brings inclusion into our realm, talking about history, to our regular visitors, and who range in age from, little children, all the way up to senior citizens. So there was a lot of engagement with this. And then the engagement actually moved out of the gallery as well. We did a number of programs, including hands-on food waste programming for this exhibit, during which we talked about the process of growing and making chocolate in the 18th century, all the way to our podcast. We have a podcast called Buried in Our Past. An entire episode has been dedicated to this exhibit and the story behind it, and people find that incredibly enjoyable as well.
Well, it was interesting. The title is very fitting and sort of bittersweet, and thinking about the process of how chocolate gets to a consumer, both in the colonial period and now. So often we don't think about how a consumer product gets to a point that we're actually consuming it. So the exhibit to me was sort of, what does chocolate mean to people? So it was interesting to see, what chocolate means to a consumer versus a producer, and maybe thinking a little bit more about how we can responsibly enjoy something that is meant to be enjoyed, but maybe from better sourced places, or thinking about the legacy of the people who initially enjoyed chocolate as essentially a new world product.
For me personally, what I learned about with this exhibit was how much those details of how cacao was produced, is produced, even how it's grown, what it looks like, those details are unknown to the general public. But the real takeaway for me is how much they are interested in the details when they're presented to them. You know, often as museum professionals and historians, we think the weeds that we sometimes get into, the details that we love so much, the public isn't really interested in, and we have to give a very high-level view all the time to keep them engaged. And this exhibit proved nothing could be further from the truth. They were hungry, no pun intended, for the details. They really enjoyed hearing them, and it gave them a deeper sense of understanding, not just about the history, but about chocolate today and how it became what it is, this thing that pretty much everybody loves.
Westport Museum thanks American Heritage Chocolate for its generous support of this important exhibit. Westport Museum for History and Culture, making history whole.